Picture this. You spend 45 minutes talking to someone who seems genuinely interested. The conversation flows naturally. She laughs at your jokes. You share stories about your lives. Then you suggest meeting up for coffee, and suddenly it's like you asked her to donate a kidney. "I'm really busy right now," she says, but 10 minutes later you see her posting on social media about how bored she is. This exact scenario is happening to thousands of men every single day, and it's not just frustrating anymore. It's the reason an entire generation is closing their dating apps for good and deciding that peace of mind beats the chaos of modern romance. Welcome to Psyche Shift, where we explore the psychology behind relationships and social behavior that shapes how we connect. Today we're unpacking why the dating landscape has become so mentally exhausting that more men are genuinely happier staying single. Let's start with something nobody wants to acknowledge. Kevin is 31, works in tech, volunteers on weekends, and actually knows how to cook real meals. He downloads a dating app, and within an hour has access to what feels like an infinite catalogue of potential partners. Sounds great, right? Except it's destroying his ability to appreciate anyone in front of him. What's happening here goes deeper than you might think. Our brains evolved in small tribes where you knew maybe 150 people total. Now Kevin's brain is trying to evaluate hundreds of potential matches while simultaneously knowing that each of those women is doing the exact same thing with hundreds of men. Nobody is choosing anymore. Everyone is just endlessly comparing. Consider what happens next. Kevin starts conversations with 5 different women. One responds enthusiastically. Another gives short answers. 2 don't reply at all. The 5th seems interested enough to agree to meet up. They set a date for Saturday, but between Monday and Saturday she's still swiping, she's still matching, she's still having conversations with other guys. Kevin isn't really a person she's excited to meet. He's an appointment in her calendar that might get bumped if something better materializes. Saturday arrives. They meet. The date goes well by any reasonable measure. Good conversation, shared interests, mutual attraction. But on her drive home, she's already wondering about the guy she matched with Thursday night, whose profile mentioned he'd just gotten back from Costa Rica. Kevin travelled to Wisconsin to see his parents. In her mind, Costa Rica guy is already winning a competition Kevin didn't even know he was in. What makes this psychologically devastating isn't rejection. Humans can handle rejection when it's clear and direct. What's crushing is being treated as perpetually replaceable. Kevin did nothing wrong. He was funny, attentive, respectful. But he's competing against a highlight reel of possibilities that exist purely in her imagination. The kicker, she'll probably post later, about how there are no good men out there. Meanwhile, Kevin is one of 5 decent guys she's currently half ignoring, because none of them feel special when you're drowning in options. And after this happens enough times, Kevin starts asking himself a reasonable question. Why am I putting energy into a system designed to make everyone feel insufficient? Now we need to address the elephant in the room. Basic courtesy has become optional in ways that would shock people from even 10 years ago. Ryan is 29. He meets someone named Melissa through mutual friends at a party. They exchange numbers. They text back and forth for 2 weeks. Real conversations, not just surface-level stuff. They discuss books they're reading, argue playfully about whether pineapple belongs on pizza, share memes that make each other laugh. They plan to grab lunch on Wednesday. Tuesday night at 11 p.m, Melissa sends a message saying she's excited for tomorrow. Ryan wakes up Wednesday morning to nothing. No cancellation. No explanation. Just silence. He texts asking if everything's okay. The message sits on read for 3 days before she blocks his number entirely. He'll genuinely never know what happened. Did someone warn her about something? Did she meet someone else? Did she just lose interest and couldn't be bothered with a 30-second courtesy text? Stop and think about what this does to someone's psychology. The rejection itself isn't the problem. If Melissa had said, "Hey, I've been thinking about it and I don't feel like we're compatible," Ryan would have moved on instantly. Instead, his brain is stuck in uncertainty. which is one of the most anxiety-inducing states humans can experience. He replays every conversation looking for the moment it went wrong. He questions his judgment. He wonders if he's missing some obvious social cue that everyone else understands. Multiply this by 10, 20, 30 interactions, and you create something called learned helplessness. Ryan's brain starts associating dating with unpredictable negative outcomes that he can't control or understand. That's not overthinking. That's a normal psychological response to repeated ambiguous rejection. And yet when men express frustration about this, they're told they're being entitled. She doesn't owe you anything, people say. Which is technically true. Melissa doesn't legally owe Ryan an explanation. But we're not talking about legal obligations. We're talking about treating other humans with basic dignity. If your friend invited you to lunch and you just didn't show up and block their number, everyone would agree that's horrible behaviour. But in dating, we've somehow normalised it as just part of the process. What really amplifies the problem is the asymmetry. When men do this, they're labelled ghosts, players, emotionally unavailable. When women do it, it's called protecting their energy or setting boundaries. The exact same behaviour gets opposite moral judgments depending on who's doing it. So you're stuck in a situation where asking for basic communication is framed as demanding too much. And men are looking at that dynamic and making a simple calculation. If this is the baseline, what's the point? Let's dig into something uncomfortable. The standards floating around in 2026 have detached from what's actually achievable for normal people. Brandon is 33. He's an engineer making $72,000 a year. He rents a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighbourhood. He goes rock climbing twice a week and plays guitar as a hobby. He's not swimming in money, but he's stable and responsible. His parents would be proud. His grandparents would think he's doing great. But on dating apps, he's invisible. What's shifted isn't that women have higher standards. Standards have always existed. What's changed is that those standards are now shaped by an endless feed of luxury, travel and lifestyle content that bears no resemblance to median reality. A woman making $48,000 will casually list 6-figure income as a requirement. A woman who hasn't been to the gym in months will say she only dates athletic men. A woman whose idea of adventure is trying a new restaurant expects men with passport stamps from 20 countries. And look, wanting what you want isn't wrong. The disconnect happens when people refuse to acknowledge the math. If most women are pursuing the same small percentage of men who check every inflated box, that creates a massive imbalance. Those top-tier men have abundant options and zero incentive to commit. The remaining men are either fighting over scraps or deciding the whole thing isn't worth their dignity. Brandon goes on dates. Women seem fine with him initially. Then they learn he drives a reliable 2016 sedan instead of something flashy. Or that his vacation this year was camping with friends instead of Bali. Or that his apartment doesn't have granite countertops. Suddenly the interest fades. Not because he misrepresented himself. Not because his personality changed, but because he's a real human with a real budget instead of an Instagram highlight reel. The crazy part is these same women will later complain that men are shallow for caring about physical appearance. But judging someone's worth based on their car or vacation photos isn't shallow. The hypocrisy is exhausting, and men are tired of being measured against standards that the women themselves can't meet if the genders were flipped. Brandon eventually realizes something freeing. He doesn't have a Brandon problem. The system has a reality problem, and once you see that, the pressure dissolves. He stops trying to compete with fantasy and starts investing in actual happiness. Here's another angle that's driving men insane. The rules keep changing depending on who you're talking to and what mood they're in. Dylan is 28. First date with someone named Amber. He's decisive, suggests a specific wine bar, orders confidently, guides the conversation, demonstrates leadership. She leaves early and texts her friend that he seemed controlling. A month later, Dylan goes out with someone named Lisa. This time, he's more collaborative, asks her preference on everything, lets her lead, keeps things democratic. She tells her roommate there was zero chemistry and he seemed passive. Same person, opposite strategies. both failures. What nobody wants to say out loud is that dating in 2026 has created an impossible contradiction. Women are biologically wired to find confidence attractive. That's not controversial. It's supported by decades of research across cultures. But simultaneously, they've been culturally conditioned to view traditional masculine traits with suspicion. The result is women who are attracted to qualities they've been taught to criticize. This creates a situation where Dylan can't win. If he demonstrates masculine energy, he risks being labeled toxic or aggressive. If he suppresses it and plays it, safe. He's boring and there's no spark. The goalposts aren't just moving, they're on a treadmill that's constantly accelerating. And the wild part is different women want completely different things, but won't communicate what those things are. You're supposed to just intuitively know whether this particular woman wants a guy who takes charge or a guy who's more collaborative. Get it wrong and you're dismissed. Get it right by accident and you still might lose to timing or luck or any of 100 variables outside your control. Dylan eventually stops trying to decode what women want and starts living according to what makes sense to him. Surprisingly, this works better than any strategy he tried before. But by that point, he's so exhausted from the trial and error that he's not even interested in dating anymore. He got the answer after the test didn't matter. Now let's talk money, because this matters more than people admit, and nobody wants to address it honestly. Eric goes on roughly 2 dates per week. Coffee meetups, dinners, occasional drinks. Even being frugal, he's dropping around $250 monthly. That's $3,000 annually. Over the past 18 months, he's been on approximately 60 first dates. 4 led to second dates. 1 became a 3-month relationship before she decided she wasn't ready for commitment. He calculated his cost per actual relationship, $4,500 for 3 months. The financial burden itself isn't even the worst part. What eats at Eric is the expectation asymmetry. In 2026, despite all the talk about equality, the overwhelming majority of first dates still operate under the assumption that men pay. Women might offer to split, but it's often perfunctory. They're expecting him to decline the offer and cover it, and if he doesn't, he's cheap. Think about the psychology at play. Eric is expected to demonstrate generosity and provision to someone who might be texting other guys during appetizers. He's funding an audition where the other person may have already decided he didn't get the part, but figures she might as well enjoy a nice meal on his dime. This isn't speculation. Men share stories constantly about women who admit they went on dates purely for free food and entertainment, with zero intention of seeing the guy again. Now flip the genders hypothetically. Imagine if men routinely expected women to spend thousands of dollars on them annually, with minimal reciprocity or return. Society would call it exploitation without hesitation, but when it's men, it's just traditional dating. The double standard is glaring once you see it. Eric looked at his bank statements and had a revelation. That $3,000 could have funded a hobby he's passionate about, could have gone toward investments, could have improved his life in tangible ways. Instead, it subsidized interactions with people who treated him like a walking wallet, and when he brings this up, he's accused of being bitter or reducing relationships to transactions. But he's not the one who made it transactional. The system did that. He's just refusing to keep paying into it. We need to examine why basic conversational skills have apparently vanished. Jordan matches with someone named Vanessa. They chat on the app for a few days. She gives detailed responses, asks questions, seems genuinely engaged. He suggests moving to text. She agrees. They exchange numbers. The conversation quality immediately drops by 80%. Now she's sending one-word replies. Cool. Yeah. LOL. He's putting in effort. She's putting in the bare minimum to keep him on the hook. Here's what's actually happening behind the scenes. Vanessa is simultaneously talking to 7 other guys. Jordan gets maybe 5% of her attention. But from Jordan's perspective, he's having a conversation with someone who suddenly became disinterested for no apparent reason. He has no idea he's in a competition, where she's giving everyone fragments of engagement while waiting to see who rises to the top. The psychological impact of this scattered attention economy is brutal. Jordan can't build genuine connection because he's never actually connecting with a full person. He's connecting with 5% of someone's bandwidth, and that 5% disappears the moment someone more interesting enters her orbit. What amplifies the frustration is the feedback loop. She'll eventually complain that men don't know how to hold conversations anymore. Meanwhile, Jordan was trying to have a real conversation and getting nothing back. The person criticizing men for low effort is the same person who couldn't be bothered to write complete sentences. The lack of self-awareness is staggering, and this pattern repeats endlessly. Men try, women half engage, connection never forms, women blame men for not trying hard enough. Men point out they were trying and getting nothing in return. Women say men are being too sensitive. Round and round it goes until men just stop trying entirely. Jordan eventually realizes he's not going to win this game. The system is built to keep him perpetually auditioning while never actually getting the role, so he stops auditioning, and somehow he's supposed to feel bad about that decision. So here's where we actually are in 2026. Huge numbers of men aren't single because they failed at dating. They're single because they succeeded at recognizing a rigged game and chose not to play. They've analyzed a landscape where their effort means nothing, where respect is negotiable, where they're judged against impossible fantasies, where they can't win regardless of what they do, and where they're expected to financially subsidize their own disrespect. And they've made a rational decision. They'd rather have peace than chaos. They'd rather keep their self-respect than sacrifice it for the possibility of companionship. This isn't about becoming bitter toward women. This isn't about abandoning the idea of relationships entirely. This is about men finally valuing themselves enough to refuse participation in systems that treat them as disposable resources. They're choosing their mental health. They're choosing financial stability. They're choosing hobbies and friendships and projects that actually bring them joy instead of anxiety. And honestly, why wouldn't they? When your alternative to dating is constant stress, confusing signals, drained bank accounts, and repeated ambiguous rejection, being single starts looking less like settling and more like winning. You wake up without that knot in your stomach. You keep money you worked hard for. You invest time in yourself instead of people who barely acknowledge your existence. You live life on your terms without someone constantly evaluating whether you're measuring up to some arbitrary standard. The dating market didn't fail men. Men simply stopped accepting a market that treated them like they were worthless. And until something fundamental shifts, until basic human decency becomes standard again, until expectations reconnect with reality, until effort gets matched with respect, you'll keep seeing more men make this exact choice. They're not giving up on relationships, they're giving up on a broken system. And maybe the fact that men are choosing solitude over what's currently being offered should tell us something important about what's actually being offered. They're voting with their absence. They're saying the current state of dating isn't worth what it costs mentally, emotionally, or financially. And perhaps that's the healthiest decision they could make. Sometimes walking away from something that consistently hurts you isn't quitting. It's self-preservation. It's recognizing your worth. It's refusing to play a game where the rules were written to make you lose. Men in 2026 are simply choosing themselves for once, and that might be exactly what needed to happen for anything to actually change